Outcomes are actually distractions. Ultimately and ironically, we have the best chance to achieve those dreams by not focusing on them. In our world today, in the real world, we all experience adversity, but so many people, too many people, they go into a situation with their fingers crossed, just hoping that everything goes smoothly because they're fearful of their reaction to that adversity. That's always stuck with me, not even from my perspective, but just in terms of what leaders do. You know, they don't avoid those hard conversations. And he put the standard above the feelings, whether it was my feelings or his feelings. He put the standards of the organization at the top.
Remember, adversity is your advantage.
Hey friends, cannot wait for you to check out this new episode of the CEO Show podcast where I interview my new friend, Bill Burke. Now, Bill is the former quarterback of Michigan State University. He played under the greatest of all time coach in football history, Nick Saban, for 5 years and beat the other greatest of all time, Tom Brady, in his storied career. So if you want to learn about overcoming adversity, how to toughen your mindset and make more income, impact, and legacy, you got to check out this episode. Hey, Bill Burke, my friend, welcome to the CEO Show podcast. Super pumped to have you.
So great to be here, Bryce. Looking forward to the conversation, and thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Well, we are kindred spirits. You are a proud Michigan State Spartan, had a storied career, as I shot your introduction. In 1999, you led the Michigan State Spartans to a 10-2 record, including a victory in the Citrus Bowl against Florida and number 7 national ranking. And one of my favorites because I just despise the Wolverines. And in your storied career, you beat the GOAT, Tom Brady, with a 400-yard game and just solidifying Michigan State's greatness and your greatness. So I'm just super pumped to talk with you, and we'll start there. You are a Michigan State Spartan. You played for the other GOAT, Nick Saban, for 4 years, who talks about the process, and he's known for leadership. So would love to just unpack some leadership lessons you learned from Nick Saban, and then specifically, I'm curious. If his philosophy was the process back in the day, or if that evolved with University of Alabama. So we'd love to open up there.
Yeah, that's a lot to open up. That's a lot to unpack. Definitely one of my favorite games and favorite memories of being a quarterback at Michigan State. And like you, I to this day can't stand the Michigan Wolverines. I respect the school, I respect the players and the program and their history, of course, but it's just a little bit different when you have something invested in the school that you went to and your arch rival is 60 miles down the road. So even though I'm not originally from Michigan, I know that a lot of my teammates went to high school with some of those guys on that team. So it's always a wonderful feeling to be able to garner those bragging rights and say that you beat the hated Wolverines. And you're right. They were quarterback that year by Tom Brady. And, you know, to his credit, he almost brought him back, but we had a tougher team, a more resilient team that year, and we're able to pull that out. But on a larger scale, really, the most transformative period of my entire life were those 5 years that I got to play for Nick Saban. So many lessons learned there that we could do an entire day of conversations just around that. And he had such an impact on me that so much so I still pass along those lessons to my kids, and I'm still living them myself every single day. So I don't know what specific questions you have, but I'm happy to dive into the inner workings of the GOAT, Nick Saban, that is, and the impact that he's had on me and my teammates back during the glory days.
Oh, I love it. Let's talk a little bit we'll talk about the process, his philosophy. Let's talk about his intensity. So watching from afar, I mean, just the guy's intense as the day is long. What was that like? What was your relationship like? What was just that environment and the relationship that you had? What did that look like, both on and off the field?
Well, that's a great question. I tell people that Nick Saban back then wasn't the Nick Saban that most people saw late in his career at Alabama. You got to put yourself in that environment and put yourself in his shoes. He still wasn't the GOAT. He hadn't won any national titles at that point. He was trying to make a name for himself, just like we are trying to chase after our dreams and get to the next level and whatever we're trying to accomplish. That's where he was during that period. And I've done the math, and how old I am now is kind of the range where he was at that time that I played for him. So there was a lot of energy there, a lot of ambition there. And the intensity of those practices was something that I don't think existed in other programs around the country. But I think it benefited us. And here's why. The coaches always try to impart that the reason the practices were so difficult, the reason they were 10 times as difficult as really they should have been, even for a competitive, high level athletic program at Michigan State, was because we were going on Saturday into this environment, into this arena to do something that a lot of people just, number one, weren't willing to do. And number two, something that people frankly couldn't do. We were going into a competitive environment. And playing the game of football, which is a contact sport, you're competing, you're performing, and you're running into other very large individuals who, in my case, wanted to take my head off, right? So we're performing, we're competing, and we're doing all of that in front of 75 to 100,000 people. And, oh, yeah, by the way, there's a deadline. There's a clock that's ticking down. So the practices had to be so intense that by the time we got to Saturday, it felt easy. And the coaching staff's philosophy was always, if you can't handle the pressure of us, the coaches, being so hard on you and demanding of you in practice, how in the world can you expect to handle the pressure that comes with game day and 75,000 people and national television? It just wouldn't be possible. So as hard as it was to go through that as a player, I so appreciated how fun and how loose Saturday afternoons actually ended up being.
Oh, wow. That makes sense in theory, but I wouldn't have thought that in my initial look. Let's talk a little bit about, I guess, the challenge in terms of, working with Nick. Yeah, there was a lot of pressure there, but what challenges did you face, working with him? And then what would you say on the flip side was like the most impactful aspect of his relationship with you? So the biggest challenge and then the biggest highlight.
Well, his personality really was just the biggest challenge, and his demanding personality. I mean, it was, I hate to use hyperbole, but it was to the level of, being maniacal or, we questioned, and I say this jokingly somewhat, but we questioned his sanity at times. He was just so driven and so intense, and there were no days off. Now players today, there's never two practices in one day, and they truly do have days off. But even our days off were not days off. Anything that was labeled as voluntary was actually mandatory. It was just nonstop dedication, and he demanded that level of dedication, not just from his players, but from his assistant coaches as well. And so those relationships were challenging from what I've heard from the assistants as well. He was a hard guy to coach with and work for, but always also a hard guy to play for because everybody wasn't operating at his level of, intensity and work ethic. It just wasn't possible. Few people can match that. So that was really challenging as a 18, 19, 20-year-old kid who was just, on campus trying to play a game that he loved and figure out, where his classes were. So that was challenging, but really the best part of it was studying his knowledge and his ability to relate to people. He was totally different between the white lines on the practice field than he was off the field when you would get him alone in an office setting. On the field, he's screaming and he's loud and he's intense. When you're sitting across from a table with him and he's rocking back and forth in his rocking chair, he talks so softly that you can barely hear him. So, but man, did he have a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge to impart. And I always felt that watching him from afar, as if, I was just an observer instead of one of his players, he really, to me, and I reflected on this many years after I got done playing. I didn't understand this when I was in the program, but he really was one of the top CEOs in the country across any industry, not just in athletics or football, but he was a recruiter. He was a manager, a football coach. He was a relationship builder. He was a fundraiser. He was all these things, and he did so many things so well that I think that combination is really what contributed to the ultimate success that he went on to have.
Yeah, totally. And this show is the CEO Show podcast. And, leadership is something that I teach, I love, I live, I breathe, I'm a student of. And you just talked about the relationship setting. So I've heard this many times over. I've watched documentaries on them, and actually very similar with your feedback. Super intense guy in the field, but like a player's player and can build strong relationships. So what did that look like for you? How impactful was your relationship with him? And then the culture of strong relationships, strong team unity in his organization?
The thing I always love about the environment that I operated in that time during my life, because it really is so unique and it's really hard to duplicate. And I think a lot of people, if they were able to step back in time and go into what that was like, would be actually shocked. Because I love the fact that in high level competitive sports, there's not a lot of gray area. There's not a lot of room for that. You don't have time. There are jobs on the line. There are people who are traveling to the stadium from out of state. They're rearranging their entire weekend to come see this particular game. So you've got to be at the top of your game at the highest level that you can operate in, so you can put a good product on the field and ultimately try and win the game. So I love the fact that, there wasn't a lot of room for pleasantries and niceties. It was a very unique environment. It was a meritocracy. So if you had the goods, if you could perform, and if you were better than anybody else at your position, you were going to play. There were no politics involved. There was just performance and how can we get the best guys on the field who can contribute the most to the ultimate goal of winning. So it's such a minefield to walk through for a leader like that, to be able to massage different relationships, because guys came from different backgrounds. They had different personalities. Some guys could handle a coach being on them really intensely. Other guys would go into a hole if you did that. So you had to, as a leader, know how to talk to and get the most out of each individual. And that can be tough to do, as you know, Bryce, when you're dealing with 100 football players in your organization.
Yeah, all different personality styles, diverse backgrounds, walks of life. So I can definitely see that. Speaking of that leadership culture, and I know I touched upon this earlier when we kicked off, but Nick is known for the process, right? For his leadership philosophy. I'm curious if that was his philosophy coaching with you at Michigan State.
Well, I'll give you the exact moment, or I should say the exact week that process was created. And as you know, it's been studied now. It's been featured on 60 Minutes on CBS. It's, people have tried to duplicate that process, and he's become famous for it now. And it's exactly what helped him to go on to win 7 national titles at LSU and Alabama. But that process, his philosophy, the light bulb, so to speak, went on for him and for us as a program. In 1998, I was a junior. We were really an inconsistent football team. We had lost as many games as we had won up until late in the season, and we were going on the road to face the number 1 team in the country, the Ohio State Buckeyes. And that's an almost seemingly insurmountable obstacle, right? We were 28-point underdogs. Nobody in the college football world gave us a chance to win that game. Everybody had penciled Ohio State in as the definite national champion that season, even though they had a few more games to play. So how do we do that? And he really talked to us about forgetting about the scoreboard, which sounds cliche, right? But he really asked us a question in the Monday of that week leading up to the game. He came into the team meeting room, and when he walked in his loafers and no socks, the whole room got quiet, and we knew we didn't have to be told to be quiet and settle down. Because the guy that we all respected, our leader, was about to speak. So he asked us a question. He said, how long does a football play last? And, we had been playing football for a long time. We never really considered it. Obviously, it doesn't take a long time, but we came to the conclusion of 6 seconds. And he said, 6 seconds is not a long time to do anything. You're probably going to be uncomfortable. You're probably going to get hurt or burned. You're going to leave some scars, but that's what we have to do. And that's how we have to go into this game, because every football play is its own living, breathing entity. And we have to treat it that way. And that's all we need to focus on. And then once that play's over, we need to reset, catch our breath, and then just focus on the next 6 seconds again. So that seems simple, really tough to do, though, when you're in an environment in a stadium with 92,000 people and you've got the number 1 team in the country across from you. But that's the only way that we could have won that game. And by the way, we did pull it out. We did. As my teammate Cedric Irvin said after the game, we shocked the world. But it was because of that process. It was because of that philosophy that allowed us to shift our perspective and think about that enormous obstacle in front of us in the right way. And to piggyback or to elaborate on that a little bit is to say that, and I tell people that I work with now this same philosophy, outcomes are actually distractions. And I'm a huge advocate of dreams and having goals. And of course, we need to establish those and have something to aim at. But ultimately and ironically, we have the best chance to achieve those dreams by not focusing on them. We have to focus on what it takes to every single day in those 6 seconds, whatever that looks like in your world, to accomplish the ultimate dream. But the reason so many people don't do that is because focusing on the thing that we want, that's what feels good. That's what feels comfortable. And all these other things that we have to do between where we are now and where we want to be, those are uncomfortable. And he talked, and I based a lot of the book that I wrote on this exact speech that he gave. He talked to us about sticking your hand in the fire, and anybody can do anything for 6 seconds. And if you stick your hand in that metaphorical fire, whatever that looks like in your world, and you keep doing that and keep stacking those uncomfortable seconds and moments, you ultimately will get to that dream. So that was a transformative week, I think, for not only us as a team, not only me as an individual, but for Coach Saban and his coaching philosophy.
Oh, that is so good. And you're right. I mean, he's world famous for this particular philosophy. I've read and watched so much about it. And the fact that you had a firsthand look at this philosophy, which is clearly ingrained in you and your success, is absolutely incredible. You just talked about your book, Victory Outside the Arena. Let's talk a little bit about that. Who'd you write it for? What are the main principles of the book? And I have some other questions about communication we'll get to, but I want to just highlight that and really give our audience the main takeaways from the principles that you teach and why you wrote it.
Sure. Well, a football player is all that I ever wanted to be. I grew up mostly in Northeast Ohio, but I fell in love with the game of football when I was living south of Pittsburgh. This is the late 70s, early 80s. We're talking, our TV looked more like a piece of furniture, this big floor model thing, no remote control. You had to get up and touch the numbers on the actual console. So we only had 3 channels, and I'd come home from church every Sunday as a little kid and just wait for those Pittsburgh Steelers to come on TV. It was the heyday. We're talking Jack Lambert and Franco Harris and Terry Bradshaw and Lynn Swann. That's where I fell in love with the game. So
the steel curtain, right?
I moved. Yeah, the steel curtain, which ironically enough, the defensive coordinator of those teams was George Perlis, who was the coach at Michigan State before I got there. So I just fell in love with that game. But when I got to the end of my career and it just ended, and by the way, as a lot of athletes experience, the career ends without your permission. You're just told you can't be on the team anymore. So I really struggled with that. I didn't know who I was or where to go or what to do. And, there wasn't the support or even the internet in those days. And there wasn't this conversation around, personal development and mental health and all that other stuff. So I was kind of lost. And so I just knew that I wanted to have an impact, number one. But number two, I knew that there were other athletes who were struggling with this same problem that I wanted to help. And I wanted to be able to give somebody a sentence or a word or the entire book to lean on if they were suffering in silence. Because the sad reality is, these programs, especially the higher that you climb and the higher level that you go up, there are so many resources that are dedicated to help you become the best player that you can be while you're there and while you have eligibility. But once your career's over, they're on to the next crop of guys and girls. So you have to really focus on figuring out who you are more so than what you do. Because I tied everything into who I was. I got reinforcement from those around me, telling me how talented I was. And of course, I stood out as an athlete and accomplished a lot. But I didn't really know who I was without that label. And I think so many people are experiencing that and continue to do so. So I just wanted to put my stamp on the world and really write that for athletes. And that's what I set out to do. But now that the book is published, I'm getting all this feedback from people that were not athletes, who are going through some sort of big transition, who are looking to reinvent themselves or reimagine themselves, or even reignite that competitor that's always lived inside of them, even though they've never been in sports. So It's really been an amazing experience, and I'm so glad that I did it. And I have plans to write future books, but this one is really the start of it all, and it's really been a big help to a lot of people. So I'm excited about it.
Oh, good for you. Well, I feel like leadership is about transition. Leadership is about change management. So the fact that you had a storied career, went through that change and transition, and are able to give back not only to athletes but also to business leaders and CEOs and just everyday people, I think is a huge gift. So well done there. One thing that you talked about, not only there in that piece, but then just previously, was the emphasis on communication. And you are a great communicator, both, verbally. You're also a storied writer as well. What's the importance of communication, and how did that serve you well when you look back at your career, talking about that before you transitioned as the quarterback, which is such a pivotal role in the organization?
Yeah, communication, I feel, is huge. And as you probably know, Bryce, it is such a it's a skill that's lacking in a lot of areas these days, not just in sports, but in the business world. And that's one of the things that I really appreciated about Coach Saban. And I'll tell you a story here in a second about his lack of fear of communication. But I think that's why a lot of us are so afraid of it. It really comes down to courage, and most of our suffering, when we have these situations that need addressed, but we don't address it because we have some fear around it. Most of that suffering, I think, comes from the avoidance of those conversations. When in actuality, I think having the conversation just in and of itself solves a lot of problems. It clears the air, and it doesn't necessarily need to lead to some huge resolution where both sides agree, because that rarely happens. And I think that's what a lot of people are fearful of. And that's why they avoid having tough conversations. And I want to tell you the story before I forget, because it really was transformative for me. And it's just become more and more impressive to me the longer I've been away from my playing days. So I mentioned that Ohio State game. And in the third quarter, we were down a little bit, but we were still in that game. And, nobody expected us to be within, one score in the third quarter. So they brought a blitz. I threw an interception and got returned for a touchdown. So now, instead of being down 17-9, we're down 24-9. So I come off the field, and coach grabbed my arm. He just wanted me to stop so he could talk to me and coach me up a little bit. And I was so upset with myself that I didn't stop. I ripped my arm away from him, and I continued to the bench and went and sat down and felt sorry for myself. So he turned around, didn't chase me. He went back and continued to coach the game. We go on to win the game. And it's just a huge celebration in the locker room. He planted a huge kiss on my cheek. I've never seen him act like that. I was so startled by it. I kind of pulled back. But he was just on cloud nine, as we all were. So the next day, which was Sunday, it was business as usual. We came in, we stretched, and we ran a little bit just to break a sweat. Nothing too crazy. The coaches, I think, just wanted to make sure that everybody was accounted for. Coach Saban came up to us afterwards and gave us a little 5-minute spiel on what we needed to be thinking about as we headed into the next week of practice. So that was Sunday. So now 24 hours have gone by since the game. The next morning, Monday morning, as usual, we always came into the building as a team to watch some of the game film from a couple days earlier. So we're all waiting in the lobby to be called into the team meeting room. And as I'm standing there, the director of operations comes out and he says, "Hey, Bill, Nick wants to see you in his office." And I thought, oh, this is great. Finally, I'm going to get an attaboy or a pat on the back from the boss, because he had questioned, whether or not I was the guy to lead the team forward at that position. So I walked into and granted, I'm a college student, so it's 6:45 in the morning. I'm not fully awake yet, right? So I go into his office. He quietly closes the door behind me, and he says, "Have a seat." And he sits down in his leather rocking chair and starts going back and forth and proceeds to rip me up one side and down the other about disrespecting him and pulling my arm away from him and walking away from him 48 hours earlier at the game. Now, here's why I tell that story. 99 out of 100 coaches or CEOs in America would have let that go because of the result of the game. We just beat the number one team in the country. Now, why is he taking the time to address this very seemingly meaningless incident on the sideline with me? And it's just so amazing to me that even though I didn't see it, after I pulled my arm away, he pulled out the little white piece of paper in his back pocket and his pen, and he wrote himself a reminder to address that with me at some point in the future. And he did that not knowing that we'd win the game. So he was going to address it regardless of the outcome. But the reason that that's so important for leaders is because if you let those things slide, they don't become noticeable, not in a week or a month or sometimes even a year. But you see leading organizations or sports teams that have all the players and they have the greatest coaches. But over time, they just start to come apart at the seams and nobody can tell why. Not letting things like that slide are the reasons why he became what he became. And I have so much respect for that. But he did it with the courage to have an uncomfortable conversation. He knew that it wasn't going to be something that anybody was comfortable with. He knew that I wasn't going to feel good about getting ripped in his office. And he probably didn't want to have the conversation with me either, but he did it anyway. And I think that is such an important component of leadership, is not avoiding the tough conversations.
So looking back at that story, just thinking, okay, you just won this amazing game. Yeah, you had a low moment, but ultimately 48 hours later, Nick Saban addresses that situation. I'm curious, in that moment in time, you're just a young kid. What was your reaction? Were you startled? Were you upset when he provided that visibility and that feedback that you disrespected him, even though you won the game?
Yeah, I was not expecting it. I was shocked, number one, and half asleep still, as I mentioned. But I was so apologetic. I didn't realize that I had disrespected him. And I tried to convey to him that even though it looked like disrespect, I was so upset with myself because I had just put our team in an even bigger hole. And this was a homecoming for me. This was a game against the Ohio State Buckeyes, who did not want me on their team. You know, I'm from Ohio. Didn't grow up a huge Buckeye fan, but I had a lot of family and friends in the stadium that day. And I wanted to put on a good performance, not just for them, but for my teammates. You know, we were in a position where we were competitive against the best team in the country. So I just tried to convey that to him. I was very apologetic. I apologized several times. I might have even fibbed a little bit in telling him that I didn't realize that it was him who tried to grab my arm, even though I probably was aware of that. You know, who else would it be, right? But yeah, I apologized and I told him it would never happen again. The entire conversation lasted probably 60 seconds. I was just trying to get out of there, you know, as quickly as I could. But man, I was shocked by the fact that he documented it and came back around to it and then realized how important this thing that seemed so small to me, how big it was to him and his organization. So that's always stuck with me, not even from my perspective, but just in terms of what leaders do. You know, they don't avoid those hard conversations. And he knew it was going to be difficult. That's why he rocked back and forth in his chair, because he was uncomfortable and he knew I would be uncomfortable, but he knew that it needed to be done. And he put the standard above the feelings, whether it was my feelings or his feelings. He put the standards of the organization at the top.
And that's just a masterclass on leadership, and ultimately why he had so much success and why you had so much success being a mentee in his program. Bill, from this particular story, you know, the challenge, the uncomfortableness, the adversity. I mean, these are common concepts that are just, you know, true in your career. They're true, you know, about winning in any organization. You had to face a ton of adversity, both externally, both within the program, working with the GOAT. What's your relationship with adversity? What did you learn in those 4 or 5 years at Michigan State, being a quarterback for the Story program, working under the Story coach, Nick Saban? What did you learn about adversity, and how do you apply that today?
Yeah, great question. And I think if I had to boil down to one word what I learned or what I experienced during those 5 years playing for Coach Saban, I would use the word adversity. Number one, what people have to understand is, and the things that I really struggled with as a player when I first arrived in this program, and a lot of my teammates did as well. We didn't know any better. And a lot of us were stars in high school. We didn't have a lot of adversity. So the thing that really slaps you right in the face when you get to this level is you have to expect adversity. And Coach Saban taught me that. In another, a much more friendly conversation one-on-one in his office, he had come from the National Football League. So he said, Bill, every game in the NFL comes down to the last 2 minutes. There are no blowouts. So even if you get up by a large margin sometime during the game, the other team's going to come back. And you have to be mentally in the moment right up until the end, because there is going to be adversity somewhere along the lines. And I think in our world today, in the real world, we all experience adversity, but so many people, too many people, they go into a situation with their fingers crossed, just hoping that everything goes smoothly because they're fearful of their reaction to that adversity and exactly how to power through it or work around it. And I think that's really something that people need to embrace and wrap their arms around, is just expect it in the first place. It's coming no matter what, no matter how hard you try and avoid it. So rather than trying to push back against it, just switching your mentality of expecting the adversity and then putting some systems in place for yourself on exactly how to handle that is going to get you much further than if you're just hoping and praying that everything goes exactly according to plan, because it almost never does.
Amen to that. Well, Bill, this has been an awesome conversation. We can go on for a while. I'm going to bring it home with this last question. The title of my podcast is The CEO Show. And certainly you've had a lot of experience being the CEO, if you will, of your team from a player's perspective. But for you, what does it mean to be the chief executive officer?
To me, everything comes back to mindset. So being the chief executive officer is a mentality. It's not a title, as you know. It's not a list of responsibilities or even a job description. But being the CEO, I think, is a perspective that encompasses the fact that our organizations, our teams, chasing our dreams, becoming the best version of ourselves, it's not an option. When you really think about it, Bryce, it's not an option. It's a responsibility. It's a duty. It's a calling. And we all have the option, the choice, and the obligation to answer that call. Now, whether or not we do that or not, that's up to each and every one of us. But to be a CEO means that you have to chase the best version of yourself. And apologies for the football cliche, but we have to give everything we have in the spirit of leaving it all on the field. That's what I want to do. You know, when we talk about looking toward the future, and I think about my future, the thing that I'm really excited about, and especially now that I've had some perspective and time to reflect back on my athletic career, is me and my teammates, we were actually impacting lives playing the game that we loved. We didn't realize it at the time. We were just throwing the ball around and having a good time for the most part and trying to win the game. But those people that showed up, that supported us, that were emotionally invested in what we were doing, the people that actually have a degree from the school that I played for, you know, they were looking to feel a certain way when they walked out of that stadium. The coaching staff had jobs on the line. We were impacting lives with our decisions and with our effort and with our work ethic. And so that's what I'm trying to do going forward. I want to impact lives by being on stages and building communities. And I want to bring people along that have those same desires. So being the CEO of the people that share the same mindset that I do and want to grow and get better together, that's what it means to me.
Oh, amen. I love that mindset and impact. And Bill, to kind of bring this home, you've had a big impact. Your family, your friends, the community, Michigan State. I'm a proud Michigan State Spartan. I watched your career. I'm a couple years behind you and come from a litany of Michigan State fans. My mom was a Michigan State Spartan back in 1976 when she graduated. So watching you play back in the day for Nick Saban was just an incredible feat. And you certainly had an impact on me, and you certainly have had a lot of impact on our audience today. I want to thank you and acknowledge you for that. And as we sign off, I want to give you the opportunity, aside from encouraging our audience to go ahead and pick up a copy of your book, Victory Outside the Arena, where could they find you, and where would be the best place to connect with you, Bill?
Yeah, thanks for that, Bryce. And I've so enjoyed being on your show. I know you're impacting lives as well and doing great things. So I really appreciate the opportunity to just have a fun conversation. But people can connect with me on socials. I spend most of my time on LinkedIn and Instagram. And then you can check me out at bill-burke.net as well. Would love to connect.
And it's been an awesome conversation. Just fires me up, Bill. And again, congratulations for all your success. And thank you so much for being on the show and adding value today.
Thank you, Bryce. Thanks for having me. Go green.
Go white, which is a perfect way to finish off. My friends, I know you got a ton of value. My humble ask, go ahead and like, subscribe, and drop your biggest takeaway from Bill, from his career, from his learning lessons, from the GOAT, Nick Saban. Would love to create some healthy dialogue. And remember, Adversity is your advantage, and we'll see you in the next episode.